Victorian poetry. During Victoria's reign, poetry became more concerned with social reality and was expected to express the intellectual and moral debate of the age. This led on one end to the creation of majestic poetry, linked to the myth and belief of the greatness of England, and on the other hand, the creation of poetry more inclined towards anti-myth and disbelief, which has to solve the ethical problem raised by science and progress. Now, the poet was seen as a prophet and a philosopher. People expected that he would reconcile faith and progress. So to sprinkle a little romance over the unromantic materialism of modern life. Optimists believed that the benefits of progress could be reached without altering the traditional social organization or destroying the beauty of the countryside. They wanted to find a corresponding attitude in poets and to be told that modern life was susceptible to romantic behavior as the remote legends of King Arthur or the Italian Renaissance. The major poets of the age were Alfred Tennyson, Robert Browning, who is remembered for his best dramatic monologues, in which he was an original creator of characters, Elizabeth Barrett Browning, who wrote beautiful love sonnets, and Gerard Manley Hopkins, known in particular for his rhythm, which broke with conventional rules, and Matthew Arnold, who used poetry to express his dissatisfaction with this time. The dramatic monologue is a narrative poem in which a single character may address one or more listener. It is related to the soliloquy used in Elizabethan plays. In Hamlet's famous soliloquy, for example, the character addresses himself and the audience in a moment of self-exploration. In a dramatic monologue, the speaking character is different from the poet himself, and it is caught in a crucial moment of crisis. An unspeaking listener, whose presence has to be inferred from clues in the speaker's monologue, is present and conditions the development of the monologue. Since the poet does not speak with his own voice, the reader has to infer whether he is intended to accept or criticize what is said by the speaker. As the speaker must be judged only on his words, different points of view may be justified and supported. This suggestion of the absence of a unique truth was the exact opposite of the Victorian law for certainties, and it paved the way to new possibilities for poetry in the modern age, bringing theirs closely in touch with the often unpredictable moments of the human mind. In a dramatic monologue, the tone of the language is argumentative, aiming at revealing the main character's doubts, thus reflecting a great interest in human psychology. So, as we said before, during the Victorian reign, the Victorian poetry led on the one hand to the creation of majestic poetry linked to the myth of greatness, where poets often celebrate heroic ideals, British Empire, national progress through mythologized figures and legendary narratives such as Ulysses, poems like Ulysses, and Idyls of the King, which glorified heroic castes and Arthurian valor. So the era's imperial expansion and industrial success fueled belief in British greatness, masculine virtue, and a civilizing mission. But on the other hand, we have the anti-myth poetry, which tried to solve the ethical problems coming from science and progress. So at the same time, poets questioned and deconstructed these heroic ideals, revealing their contradiction and limitation. For example, Browning's romantic monologues like My Last Eucharist exposed the dark psychology behind power. And also, she critiqued She critiqued the masculine heroic ideals, exposing gender inequality and social injustice behind imperial glory. On Moldova Beach, laments for the loss of faith and certainty, undermining confident narratives of enlightenment. And also, the anti-myth revealed how weakness often concealed moral corruption, human suffering, and the fragility of celebrated values. The key characteristics of the Victorian poetry are realism and everyday life, because the emphasis was on realistic portrayal of everyday experiences and working class struggles. This poetry is also characterized by psychological depth. So a complex exploration of the lives of characters through introspection, the use of vivid imagery and symbolism to convey deeper meanings and complexity, thematic complexity, form experimentation. So we can note innovation with diverse poetic forms, including dramatic monologue, a soliloquy, a very different soliloquy from, for example, Hamlet's soliloquy, narrative verse, and modified traditional structures. A sensory focus, so an attention to sensory elements and detailed observations, integrating scientific knowledge with artistic expression, and also a balanced approach, so a synthesis of romantic ideals with a grounded approach to address contemporary social and moral issues. The exponent of this period are, for example, Lord Tennyson and Robert Browning. Are considered as masters of Victorian poetry. So, Lord Tennyson reconciled evolutionary science with religious faith through masterful use of language, and, as we said, evocative imagery. Major works are In Memoriam A.H.H., which is a profound elegy exploring mortality and loss. Ulysses, a dramatic monologue about aging and the youth of adventure. The Lady of Shalott, that retells Arthurian legend with rich symbolism. Tennyson explored themes of love, loss, faith, and the search for meaning amid social and scientific change, characteristic of this time, giving voice to personal and collective mourning. He served as poet laureate during much of Queen Victoria's reign, becoming a central literary figure and national symbol of poetic authority. We have also mentioned Robert Browning, who was a pioneer of the dramatic monologue form. His works are My Last Duchess, which offers a chilling portrait of a duke, Fratly Polippi meditates on the artist's role, and The Ring and the Book, a long narrative built on a murder trial. He frequently used historical and literary figures to craft vivid and emotionally charged character portraits that confront moral and social tensions. He focused his works on exposing inner thoughts and moral ambiguity through single-speaker narratives. Other poets of this period are Matthew or Arnold, who advocated criticism of life, philosophy, and suggesting that poetry should replace religion in providing moral guidance. Gerard Hopkins, a Jesuit priest who revolutionized poetic rhythm with innovative sprung rhythm and sound rhetoric. Elizabeth Barrett Browning, who was a pioneer of feminist poetry, addressing social justice, women's rights, and humanitarian concerns. And also Christina Rossetti, who combined religious symbolism with feminist themes and melancholy tone. She addressed gender inequality, concern for the poor, and spiritual meditation. She was one of the most important female voices in Victorian poetry. Victorian themes in poetry, to recap, Victorian themes in poetry are religion and science, because Darwin's theory of evolution challenged biblical creation accounts and prompting poets to explore crises of belief. Other themes are industrialization and social reform, so poets addressed urbanization, harsh labor condition, class divisions, advocating for working class rights and reforms such as the abolition of child labor. Another theme is the nature and environment. So writings present a realistic view of nature that contrasts with romantic idealization, lamenting the loss of rural landscape and factories and industrial infrastructure. Mortality and meaning. So persistent concerns with death, beauty, goodness, and human achievements lead poets to philosophical reflection and varied moods of coping with existential uncertainty, domestic life, and gender. So many poems idealize family and home. And woman poets increasingly challenge gender discrimination and asserted alternative perspectives on domestic roles, progress, and anxiety. So poets simultaneously celebrated technological advancement and expressed anxiety about the erosion of traditional values. Poetic forms and innovation are dramatic monologue. So a single speaker addresses a silent listener, revealing inner thought and motivation, allows exploration of complex moral and psychological issues through diverse characters' voices. And this dramatic monologue was used by Browning poetry. The narrative verse, so extended storytelling through poetry that explores historical, mythological, and contemporary themes, with detailed character development and unfolding plot structures. The blank verse, so unrhymed iambic pentameter, used extensively in longer narrative, a modified traditional form. Poets adapt ballads, sonnets to new thematic purposes and contemporary concerns, or rhythmic experimentation. For example, Hopkins pioneered sprung rhythm to create more natural, expressive poetic language that was very different from strict metrical patterns. And also a medieval revival, drawing inspiration from Arthurian legends and medieval motifs as in Tennyson. And also integration of arts. So the pre-Raphaelite movement united poetry with painting and music, emphasizing aesthetic, beauty, sensory richness, and cross collaboration across artistic media. Their superior way of life, their institutions, law, and political system on native peoples throughout the world. This attitude came to be known as jingoism, colonial power and economic progress made for the optimistic outlook of many Victorians.
Alfred Tennyson was born in Somersby, Lincolnshire, in 1809. He was the fourth son of the 12 children of a clergyman, a cultivated but embittered man devoted to drinking. Part of the family heritage was epilepsy, and disease then thought to be brought on by sexual excess and therefore shameful. He was first educated at his father's factory and then at Trinity College in Cambridge. Here he was living for the first time among young men of his own age who knew little of the problems that had surrounded him for so long. He was extraordinarily handsome, intelligent, and humorous, and soon he was at the center of a group of young men interested in poetry and conversation. It was probably the happiest period of his life. In Cambridge, he also met Arthur Allam, who was to become his close friend, and espoused much of his poetry. He left Cambridge without completing a degree. However, while studying there, in 1803, he published his first important collection of verse. Poems, chiefly lyrical, followed by another volume 2 years later. He traveled to the continent with his friend, but in 1833, Allam died in Vienna, and Tennyson spent several years meditating on this tragic loss, from which he only gradually recovered. In 1850, he published his long autobiographical work, In Memoriam, A.H.H., voicing his regret for Allam's death, and in the same year after that William Wordsworth was that, he was made a poet laureate. He was regarded as the greatest poet of his day. Tennyson enjoyed considerable financial success. In 1884, he was given the title of Baron for his literary merits. He said in the House of Lords, and for some time he took himself seriously as a politician. He died in 1892 and was buried in Westminster Abbey. Tennyson's first remarkable works were dramatic monologues, included poems, published in 2 volumes. They consisted of a revised selection from the volumes of 1830 and 1832, and of other poems such as Mort d'Arthur and Ulysses. The former, which has an allegorical meaning, presents King Arthur's knights and their brotherhood destroyed by the absence of a true leader. The poet wonders about the existence of standing values in his own age, characterized by obsessive materialism and certainty, but he does not succeed in finding an answer. Ulysses is a personal version of the legend of Ulysses. In 1847, Tennyson wrote a narrative poem, The Princess, appreciated by the public for its support of women's right to education. In Memoriam is one of the finest elegies in English literature. Composed at intervals over many years, it consists of 131 sections, all of a varied number of stanzas, all written in a single meter, iambic, tetrameter, rhyming A-B-B-A. Most of these sections, long or short, are self-sufficient and complete poems about death and life, and the element of unity is the grief of the poet for his friend's death. That is the regret for what is normal. Ulysses. The inspiration for this dramatic monologue is come in part from Danton, who supplies the story in his Inferno, not to be found informer of the last adventure of Greek hero. Ulysses is an overreacher who follows knowledge at any coast beyond the pillars of Heracles and into dangerous waters. He greatly aptell to Tennyson and Darwin's age of terrible musism, as the poet himself called astronomy and geology. Tennyson uses the character of Ulysses and Telemachus to represent two kinds of life. While Ulysses stands for an active, adventurous life, rich in imagination, Telemachus, who embodies the typical Victorian man, stands for a more uneventful life, devoted to responsibility and social duties. He daily qualified to implement the kind of policy in which Tennyson believed, the gradual civilization of a round people. As for his style, Tennyson was a true Victorian, for he felt the need for balance and regularity. He was the master of onomatopoeia and kennings, that is, pictorial descriptions of something that is not named directly. This linguistic image differ from the old Anglo-Saxon ones, and since they are longer, complex phrases and not mere compound nouns. These rich image derive, or however, from the same desire to secure dignity, richness, and variety, and to slow down the piece of reading by making the reader stop and study them carefully. More than any other Victorian writer, Tennyson embodied the spirit of his age. He expressed the national pride and the love of order of the Victorians, the conventional sentimentality of the middle class, and the optimistic belief in the progress of mankind. But like so many men of his time, he worried about God, nature, man, the meaning of life, and science, as Darwin's theory of evolution and undermined the belief in a benevolent God and in the truth of the Bible. Tennyson, as a true Victorian, looked for a compromise between science and religion, and considered faith the result of a battle, always susceptible to doubts and not a permanent possession. His idea of nature was that of a scientist, and unlike Watts, he never invested it with mysticism. What worried him was the picture of a nature indifferent to human suffering and the absence of a special immortal destiny for man. However, he was able to find an element of hope in Darwin's concept of natural selection. Man, a pudging team, was gradually evolving towards something better.